There are several checks you can perform to verify the gauges in your instrument cluster are working correctly. These can be helpful if you're trying to determine whether or not an incorrect or questionable reading is a result of a bad sending unit, broken wire, or the gauge itself. We cover the fuel gauge in a separate video, so we will not repeat the troubleshooting process here. Instead, this video will focus on testing electronic oil pressure and water temperature gauges. Some older vehicles use a capillary tube to feed direct oil pressure to the gauge. If you suspect one of these mechanical gauges is faulty, you'll want to check the reading with a known good mechanical gauge or tester. We'll use 1965 GTO water and oil pressure gauges for the sake of our example, but the process will remain the same for any aftermarket or factory electronic gauge. The sending unit threads into a dedicated location in the engine block or cylinder head and sends a signal to the gauge via the sending unit wire. In the case of a water temperature sending unit, resistance decreases as water temperature increases. This decrease in resistance effectively creates a better ground, which is what causes the needle on the gauge to move. This is what makes the needle move from cold to hot as the engine warms up. Since we know how the sending unit works, it makes it easy to check to see if the gauge is working. With the key on, grounding the sending unit wire to the engine block or negative battery post should make the gauge read full hot. If you ground your sending unit wire but do not see any change in the gauge in the car, it's possible there is a break in the sending unit wire or your gauge is faulty. Removing the wire from the sending unit with the key on should result in the gauge showing cold. If you remove the sending unit wire but the gauge still reads hot, you may have a short in the wire or a faulty gauge. You can test this by removing the sender wire from the back of the gauge and running a jumper wire from the gauge connection to ground. If the gauge moves to hot, you have a break in the wire or bad connection in the sending unit feed wire. If the needle still doesn't move to hot, you have a faulty gauge. The oil pressure sender is similar but changes resistance value based on pressure instead of temperature. Grounding and removing the sending unit wire should have the same results as with the water temperature gauge. Since both signals rely on a ground through the engine block to function, it's important not to use Teflon tape on the threads because it can isolate the sending unit to the point where it cannot make a good ground. You can check your sending unit resistance value to factory specifications by using an ohm meter. This will vary based on the application, so it's important to check your factory service manual or gauge manufacturer's specifications for your particular sender before testing.